Welcome, everybody, to the Aravosis Report. Microphone helps. This is the Aravosis Report. John Aravosis here. Microphone and all this time. How's everybody doing today? I'm going to start my TikTok as I'm speaking to you as well. Hope everybody's doing well. Today's Monday, what is it, November 7th? And day before the big elections here in the United States, the congressional elections and state elections. We call these the midterm elections because they're basically the elections, not presidential, but everything else in essence. Let me get TikTok set up. There we go. As always, decent amount of news to talk about today. Welcome, TikTokers. Hey, Cindy and everybody else. As always, TikTok folks seem to be joining kind of quickly lately, but maybe if you guys want to do just a quick shout out where you're hailing from, always fun. Do that, and then I will get rolling. Just looking here. Yeah, anyway, there's a good amount of news, so I will maybe explain once or twice while we're waiting for folks to join how this works. I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. I do a Monday to Friday discussion about the news from Ukraine. I present for about half an hour of the news, and then we do question and answer. Remember, folks, you can submit questions on TikTok using the Q&A function in my profile. Moderators, if you could maybe just keep repeating that for folks. That way I don't sound like a drone. And for the rest of you, obviously, you can use the chat functions at the bottom. Let me just give you guys a quick update on how we're going to do this. As I said, I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. I'm going to give you the latest news from Ukraine. I do this Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to do about 20 to 30 minutes of news, and then I'm going to take your questions. Thank you, Louie. On TikTok, submit the questions via the Q&A link in my profile. On YouTube and everywhere else, you can obviously use the comment box. The best way you can help me with my work, because I'm independent media, nobody is paying for this other than you guys. So best way you can help me, follow me on TikTok, follow me on all the other services, please subscribe, and gifts. The gifts make a big difference. They actually are very supportive. Thank you, Allie. That is a perfect example on TikTok. Those fun little gifts on the screen actually put money in the pocket of the creators. They're very helpful. So thank you. And for you guys, super chat questions and super stickers as well. Finally, on TikTok, I will always do a shout out if I see the gift. So I thank you for that. And on YouTube, same thing. Priority for the questions on YouTube, super chats. And finally, subscribers to my TikTok, the actual paid subscribers, will get priority for questions. Let's dive in, guys, right now. So BBC is reporting that there's new satellite imagery showing an additional 1,500 mass graves in the Ukrainian town of Mariupol. Mariupol, you will recall, I will show you on my handy dandy t-shirt map. Mariupol is this town down here that the Russians have occupied now for, well, since really close to the beginning of the war. You'll recall this was a town, a city of 450,000 people. It's down to probably 100,000 or fewer now. The Russians had been fighting the Ukrainians here for months. This is the town in which, remember the Ukrainian troops, the Azov battalion, they were holed out in the Azovstal steel plant, and the 2,000 Ukrainian troops were fighting for 2 months against 14,000 Russians and holding them off famously. That is the town of Mariupol. Well, the Russians still occupy. It's still horrible situation there. You know, water, heating, you name it, destroyed public facilities. The Russians still control it. The Russians aren't fixing anything. And the satellite imagery is now showing another 1,500. Thank you, Joy, for that. Graves in another mass grave in the town. Really bad. New York Times. The Russians are upping their efforts to force Ukrainian civilians from the Kherson region. This is a region we talk about a lot, and it is because it's probably the main, I would argue this is the main front in the war right now, even though there's really two main fronts. Thank you, Inspired Woman. The two main fronts in the war right now, out here in the east, more or less where my finger is here, okay? And over here in the south. This is, let's forget about this for all, because there isn't much going on. I mean, there's a lot of fighting going on, but not much news out here. This gets interesting in Kherson, okay? Kherson, Kherson, is a province and a city. most of Ukraine's provinces, if not all of them, the capital city is named after the province itself. So it's almost like New York, New York, right? So you've got the province of Kherson, and you've also got the capital city of Kherson. So a lot of times when you follow the news and you're hearing about Kherson in Ukraine, kind of read closely because they don't. Oh, and we have our first whale. Thank you, James. Thank you so much, James. As always, very generous. I really appreciate that. Thank you. The town of Kherson. So what is going on here? And I always like to kind of explain that. Oh, that's right, the wave. I always promise I do the wave when we get the whales. Sorry about that. I almost forgot. The river cutting Ukraine in half, the Dnipro River, okay? It goes all the way here, up to Belarus, okay? Cutting through Kyiv. Most of the Russian troops are east and south of this river, okay? The Russian troops that are overall, that are occupying Ukraine, they're over here, here, all the way down here. And right here with the river, they cross this part right here. North of the river, you've got maybe 20,000 Russian troops, okay? South of the river, you've got another 50,000. And so this whole province of Kherson, north of the river, 20,000, south of the river, 50,000. Well, the Ukrainians, very smartly, in trying to take back this province, said, well, you know what? The only spot we've got the Russians sort of, dead to rights is where they're in a really bad strategic position is here north of the river. Because what happens if the Ukrainians come down and start pushing the Russians back? The Russians can only go back so far until their back's up against the river and they've got to cross some bridges. So what did the Ukrainians do? For about the last 3 months or so, the Ukrainians have been blowing up the bridges across this river, okay? Now, there was a famous bridge, the Kerch Bridge, that was blown up about a month ago. That bridge is all the way down here, okay? That's a different bridge, but actually related to the same battle because the Russians, even though it's blue here, Russia is actually over here. The Russians have been using the Kerch Bridge to supply their troops fighting in Kherson. So that's why we believe it was the Ukrainians blew up the Kerch Bridge a month ago and really caused a lot of damage. They made it much harder for the Russians to reinforce their troops that are fighting here in Kherson. Well, the other bridge strategy the Ukrainians did was blowing up 3 or 4 bridges that are also across the river right here. And now those bridges are in such bad shape that basically, if the Ukrainians push the Russians against this river, the Russians they will not be able to drive equipment across the bridge. Thank you, Hector, for that. They will not be able to drive equipment across the bridge. They can possibly get their bodies across the bridge. More likely, the Ukrainians, the Russians, are having to build pontoon bridges. But these are floating bridges. But remember what happened? Remember at the beginning of the war, if you were following this, there was something about the Russians crossing these pontoon bridges and the Ukrainians just blowing them up. And I mean, we're talking Russian tanks, like multiple Russian tanks sinking to the bottom of this river, as many as possibly 1,000 Russian troops killed. I mean, it was a horrific attack, or a tremendous attack, depending how you want to put it, for the Ukrainians against the Russians. That was taking place out here. So anyway, that's the situation the Russians are in here. They're fighting here. The Ukrainians want to push them against the river. And what the Russians have been doing, thank you, El, for that. What the Russians have been doing is forcing evacuations from the area north of the river. There have been, I read about this, I was reading this actually to you guys, I think it was Friday's broadcast, telling you, for example, local Ukrainian citizens are saying that the Russians have been, they've been blowing up food and water, blowing up water, blowing up heat, right? They're trying to make it literally impossible. Thank you, Arabella. They're trying to make it impossible for the civilians to stay there. Now, why? It's not entirely clear why the Russians are trying to force out the civilians. One possible reason is the civilians in Kherson in particular, in that region in particular, have been doing an amazing job of basically working as resistance. You know, Maquis, if you follow Star Trek or you follow your French history of World War II, they're resistance fighters. And a lot of the local citizens are basically phoning in the position of Russian troops to the Ukrainians so the Ukrainians can hit them and hit them with their artillery and everything else. So one thought is the Russians are trying to force all of the citizens out of that northern region of Kherson, north of the river, so that when the big battle takes place between the Russians and the Ukrainians for the town of Kherson, that all the civilians will be gone so that they won't be able to help the Ukrainians identify where the Russians are, where their equipment is, where their artillery is, things like this. That's the thought. Let me see what else we got here. Just to remind you guys who I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. This is my broadcast every Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, where we talk about the latest from Ukraine. The best way to help me here is follow me, please, on TikTok and elsewhere. And please keep the gifts coming. They very much support my work, and it helps, frankly. So please keep the gifts coming. I will always do a shout out for the gifts. Explosion. This was an interesting story, just to mention. I don't have any more details on it, but very interesting. So, thank you for the Aflac duck. The governor of Russia's Belgorod region said the oil terminal in the Russian village of Golovchino was under fire. Now, and it was under fire, and there was an explosion. It was on fire. Now, this is interesting, okay, because it is possible that you don't want to overestimate everything going wrong in Russia being Ukraine, right? Sometimes accidents happen, sometimes fires happen. But the town of Belgorod in Russia has a lot of bad news that happens. And frankly, I think 99% of it's the Ukrainians. Early on, well, let me show you where it is first, okay? Here's the town of Kharkiv, Ukrainian town, second biggest Ukrainian city, population 1.5 million, okay? Kharkiv is right close to the Russian border. We're talking 15, 20 miles from the Russian border. Thank you, Ray Cray, for that. Oh, both of you. I got double, and Uncle Crazy. Thank you for that. So Kharkiv is about 15, 20 miles from the Russian border. You go another 20, 25 miles across the border, and what do you get? The Russian town of Belgorod. So Belgorod is only 40, 50 miles max from Kharkiv and only 20 miles from the Russian border. So this town here has been, it's been important. The Ukrainians have been hitting it. And actually the main reason the Ukrainians keep hitting it is because it's super important to the Russians for logistics, for supplying their troops. This is a big city here. The Russians use it, railroads and everything else coming through here to supply the Russian war effort in the east. So the Ukrainians keep hitting it. That's why, to me, it's interesting that there was a report this weekend, as I said, that an oil terminal was on fire in Belgorod, because if you ask me, it was probably the Ukrainians. Wall Street Journal reporting today that President Biden's top national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, has been engaging in recent months in confidential conversations with top aides to Russian President Putin in an effort to reduce the risk of a broader conflict over Ukraine and warn Moscow against using nuclear or other weapons of mass destruction. So basically, this story is interesting, okay? And it's interesting because there has been concern all along that NATO not to negotiate with Russia on behalf of Ukraine. And what I mean by that is that the Russians would like nothing better than to basically say, Ukraine, this is about the great powers. This is about Russia versus America, and Russia and America should sit down and we should divide up Ukraine like some little ant of a country that doesn't matter. Thank you, Ellen. And decide who gets what territory. Well, America doesn't want to do that. NATO doesn't want to do that. Understandably so, because it would be morally wrong to do that. We're not going to decide what Ukraine should do, when Ukraine should sue for peace, and under what conditions Ukraine should sue for peace. That's a Ukrainian decision, right? So at first I saw this story and I got a little worried because I read the story and I went, okay, why are we talking to the Russians secretly behind the scenes for months? The details as explained are not a bad idea. The details as explained are that basically it's important to keep communications open when you are in a wartime situation. Look, officially we're not supposed to say that this is a proxy war with Russia. A proxy war basically means you're fighting with somebody, but you're fighting via other people. So for example, Nicaragua in the 1980s was a proxy war between the Soviet Union and the Americans, for example, you could argue. Thank you, Aflac Duck. I would argue. Ukraine. Now, Ukraine gets a little more interesting because calling Ukraine a proxy war to some degree can minimize the Ukrainian role here, okay? Russia attacked Ukraine. Russia attacked Ukraine for no reason. Russia did not attack you, right? I mean, for no reason at all, unjustified. And the US and NATO and Asia, many Asian countries, jumped in to help the Ukrainians. So I don't like calling it a proxy war because it takes away, the young kids like to use the word agency. I think it's overused, but in this case, it sort of takes away the agency from the Ukrainians. And I think that's inappropriate because this is their war. Having said that, we are clearly involved in this war. We are a party to this war. And to deny that, I think, is also a little bit crazy. So whenever you got a situation like the news I just gave you, where the American National Security Advisor is basically secretly having discussions with the Russians behind the scenes, you'll want to make sure that it's not a situation where, we're cutting some kind of a deal or something. I don't think we are. And in the end, I think it's important to be saying that for the Americans and the Russians to be talking just because it's war. And you don't want mistakes made. Thank you, Bonnie, for that, for the disco ball. That was very generous of you, because when you're not talking is when the mistakes can happen. What do we got here? Mistakes. Oh, I was going to mention to you guys, I've got a Discord, by the way. Definitely go and check out my Discord maybe after the show. It's discord.aravosis.com. We've got a lot of great discussions going on there, and I've got a lot of cool Ukrainian auction items. We just auctioned off a Zelensky shirt, the green shirt that Zelensky wears. He didn't wear the shirt. It's not a dirty shirt. Thank you, Ellen. But it's literally the same brand and the same shirt that Zelensky wears. We're able to find the provider. We just auctioned one of those off. Actually, it's got another day or two to be auctioned off. We've got some Azov-style steel bracelets, all sorts of really cool stuff. So check out my Discord, discord.aravosis.com. The Iranian missiles, thank you, Bonnie. This is a story that keeps coming and is disturbing. To date, the Russians have been using Iranian drones to attack the Ukrainians, to attack the electrical infrastructure, water infrastructure, basically going after civilians for the winter. The Russians are trying to do anything they can to make it as painful as possible for the Ukrainians over the winter. Well, the latest move by the Iranians is now selling surface-to-surface missiles to the Russians, which basically would be missiles. When you say surface to surface, you mean, thank you for the corgi there, Lex, you mean missiles that take off from the ground and would attack other Ukrainian targets on the ground. So they would fire probably from Russia, probably. Actually, I'll tell you, they've got a range of 300 to 700 kilometers, which would be 200 to maybe 450 miles. Is that about right? I'm going to say range. So they could fire from Russia and fire into Ukraine. They probably will. Thank you for the duck there, Melaine. The concern they've got is that the Ukrainians don't have an effective way of stopping these missiles. The Ukrainians have been able to successfully stop a lot of the Russian drones, the Iranian drones, but the problem is so many drones come at once that it can be, you can stop 90%, but if 10 drones get through, they're able to blow up an electrical facility or a water distillation plant, something like that, right? So the concern here with these missiles is that they won't be able to destroy these missiles. They don't have a defense against them. And what the Ukrainians have been saying, which is interesting, a Ukrainian Air Force spokesman said either today or yesterday that the missiles may have to be destroyed at their launch sites in Russia. Now, this should not be such a controversial proposal. All they're saying is if the Russians are attacking Ukrainian civilians or attacking Ukrainian military from a launch pad in Russia, why can't the Ukrainians fire at that launch pad, even if it's in Russia, right? Well, the problem is the Americans and NATO have been trying to dissuade the Ukrainians from doing attacks in Russia. Specifically, they've made the Ukrainians promise not to use the weapons we've provided them to attack within Russia. But also, I think it's pretty clear that we got a promise from the Ukrainians to restrain themselves about doing any attacks in Russia. Now, the reasoning we keep giving is, we're afraid of doing the, we're afraid of pissing off Putin, and we're afraid of some kind of escalation or something. Now, this drives me kind of crazy. I mean, this gets us into the whole nuclear war discussion and everything else. I don't want to get into all of it right now because I've talked about this before. But basically, if Russia starts a nuclear war, we've got nukes too, and the whole world blows up, and Russia knows it. So not only should we be afraid of a nuclear war, Russia should be afraid of a nuclear war as well. Thank you, Malto and Ellen. And I think Russia is afraid of a nuclear war. I think Russia is bluffing with all of this nuclear talk. Absolutely, positively bluffing. The problem is that when we, hang on a sec. Sorry, I was like looking at this with the missile. But we've let Russia scare us, and we've let Russia put us in a situation where we're afraid to even let Ukraine defend itself. I mean, literally, if the Russians are sending a missile from Russia and from a missile battery, like 30 miles, 50 miles inside Russia, why can't the Ukrainians take out the battery? What's the difference here? It's at some point, and I think the Ukrainians keep trying to push the issue, and they should push the issue. At some point, thank you, Wei. At some point, we're going to have to come along on this, or the Russians are going to literally take out all the water and all the electricity across Ukraine, and it's going to be a big problem for civilians for about 40, well, maybe not 40 million, 35 million. I mean, depending how many Ukrainians are left that haven't left the country. I am John Aravosis. You are listening to the Aravosis Report. This is my daily show, Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, sometimes with funny hats. Thank you, Louis. 6 p.m. Eastern, where I talk about the latest news from Ukraine for about half an hour. And then we do about a half an hour of questions that you guys can submit on TikTok via the Q&A function in my profile. The rest of you via, obviously, the boxes there. I did see a super chat question. I will get to that next. And the best things you can do to help me, please do follow me on TikTok. Please follow me elsewhere and keep the gifts coming. The gifts are very helpful. They help, they help sponsor my work. The only money I'm getting to do this, to keep doing it, is from you guys. So thank you so much. Real quick, we did have a question, although I think it was about my auction, from Todd. Hey, Todd. Any more Trident lapel pins coming to auction? The blue one was lovely. I know the blue one is lovely. I don't think we've got any more. Vlad sent a number of the little Trident pins. I'm actually going to ask Vlad about that, because in our auction, we do auctions on my Discord, discord.aravosis.com, really cool Ukrainian stuff. And we had these really cool little pins that we only had a handful of, and we don't have them. We don't have any more. Thank you, Malto, for that. But I will ask Vlad more. I'm going to call them Odessa pins because they're from Odessa. Yeah, it's funny. I wasn't sure people would like those, and they're very popular. They're very. Thank you for that too. Thank you, Blake. They're and P.S. Pam Pam. They're stunning in person. I will say that about the pins. The photos don't do them justice. In person, they're just gorgeous pins. All right, let me see here. A little more news here, guys. Oh, yes, Russia confirms another general is out. So this has been very interesting. Russia keeps firing its generals, or at least demoting them. And it's been pretty much after every setback they've had, they then just go after more generals, more generals, more generals. Thank you, Carlos. This one is General Alexander Lapin, or Lapin, I'm going to guess, probably pronounced in Russian, or Lapin. He was criticized by Ramzan Kadyrov, who's the Chechen strong lord, who's friend of Putin, big hardliner. He went after sorry, looking at the comments as we're talking here. He went after Lapin really hard, and basically Putin got rid of him. Thank you, June. So very interesting what's going on there. But what is good about this is it doesn't help the Russians to constantly be losing their military leaders. Especially in a military like Russia, you've got very top-down power, okay? You've got a situation where the Russian military is not empowered to make decisions on its own, the lower people, not at all. And what happens is when you keep getting rid of the higher ups, you're getting rid of the decision makers. You're getting rid of the people that the troops look to and the local leaders look to tell them what to do, and they keep getting fired. Now, imagine like yourself, okay? Remember how disastrous, I would say it's almost always been disastrous for me. Thank you, Neil. When I've had a good job, meaning a job that I liked, and my boss left and a new boss came in, almost always the new boss was a disaster. And at the very least, the new boss would shake things up and do things totally differently, and you hated work. Well, imagine Imagine what happens every time a new general comes in with these troops, because the troops are basically looking and going, great, now the orders have changed again. But also, if you're a Russian soldier, okay, and this war hasn't been going really well, you keep watching the higher ups lose their heads. Well, metaphorically at least, lose their heads because the war isn't going well. You start to go, well, if they're getting fired, then like, you know what I mean? Like, it's basically, you sort of lose all confidence in the command structure. And actually, I just saw a video today. I'm forgetting his name. Thank you, Flower Lady. I'm forgetting his name. One of you showed it to me, and I checked it out on TikTok, like CPS Scotty or something like that. If anybody knows who I mean, mention it, because I'm happy to give him credit. He showed a video today of a Russian general visiting the troops, CPS or CP Scott. Thank you. That's it. CP Scott. Really good. I mean, I've seen his stuff before on TikTok. The Russian general is visiting the troops. He's obviously drunk. I mean, this general is drunk, talking to the troops, and it's like 100 or a couple hundred troops there with this guy, and they're just berating. I mean, they're screaming at the general. They're absolutely screaming at this general. I mean, the morale is not great here. The other video that's really interesting, and this one I posted on TikTok today, was a Russian prisoners of war who were just mobilized a month ago, okay? Held by the Ukrainians. They're on tape. And the thing is, there's like 20 Russian POWs, and they're all kind of jumping in at once, telling their story. All I can say is, granted, when someone's a prisoner of war, you know, you want to be careful because it's not always clear, right, that they're speaking freely. These guys are all jumping in, these Russian POWs. It sure sounds like they're telling the truth, because they're all really pissed off at the way they were treated by their own Russian commanders. And each one is jumping in to like top the other about what happened. Basically, these guys were mobilized a month ago. So these were some of the new guys mobilized right beginning of October. They said they were told they were going to Belgorod. Belgorod, as I was telling you guys earlier, Belgorod is a Russian city right across the border here with Kharkiv, okay? They were told they were going to Belgorod. They weren't going to fight because these guys were new. They had no training. Instead, they sent them all the way over here to near Svatove, the front line of fighting. They sent these guys. These guys didn't know what they were doing. They got abandoned by their commanders. The commanders literally fled and left these guys, like a couple hundred of these guys. They started getting bombed by their own Russian artillery. They said for 3 days, their own artillery was bombing them. For the whole period of the 3 days, they also didn't have food. For 3 days, these Russian troops weren't given food. Sorry, sip of water. Thank you for reminding me, Sky Queen. It is an amazing video. Like I said, I put it up on the, with a translation from War Translated on my TikTok. These Russian troops, the morale of these troops cannot be great. Anyway, it was just, it kind of blew my mind watching that video because, you know, I've worked in journalism for a number of years as well, and political activism and politics. You kind of develop a gut sense for what's real and what's not. And as I said, you always want to be careful if someone is being held as a prisoner of war. You want to be careful what they're saying. The same thing with Brittany Griner, frankly. Brittany Griner confessed to using drugs. You know, she confessed to using drugs while she was basically being held hostage by the Russians. I don't believe anything Brittany said at this point. Maybe she brought the drugs in, maybe she didn't, right? These troops, though, you watch them and you get the sense these guys are telling the truth because they're so pissed off and they're so jumping. I mean, literally the guy's going, they bombed us for 3 effing days. He goes, 3 days. He goes, and then the commanders, they left us. They just ran. I mean, and the way he's saying it, you're going, this is not somebody with a gun to his head. Anyway, really interesting thing to check out. What else have I got here? Washington Post. I was going to say, I've got a store as well. Please go check out my store, store.aravosis.com. We've got a lot of Ukrainian themed goods, t-shirts and hoodies, especially coming up to the holidays. actually does a good sale. People have liked what's there. So check them out, store.aravosis.com. Now, let me talk a little bit about negotiating. So there have been a couple different stories going on. This weekend, there was a story in the Washington Post that the Americans had been pressuring the Ukrainians behind the scenes to say publicly that they were open to negotiating with the Russians. Now, supposedly, it wasn't pressure to negotiate. It was pressure to make clear they were willing to negotiate. And what I mean by that is the idea was that the Americans felt that the Ukrainians looked bad from a public relations perspective by constantly saying they're not going to negotiate with Putin. The Ukrainians said, I think it was a week ago, maybe, and I'm stating the facts here. I'm not taking a position here because I understand why the Ukrainians don't want to negotiate with the Russians because the Russians aren't serious. But the Ukrainians said like a week ago, we'll negotiate with the next Russian president, not this one, right? Now, what the Americans were saying, which I think isn't necessarily a terrible idea, what the Americans were saying is, look, we're not saying you should negotiate with him. We're saying you should say publicly, we're happy to negotiate anytime because you want the European allies. Thank you, Ellen. You want the European allies. You want, frankly, if the Republicans take over the Congress in America, you want to be presenting this face of Ukraine being a good ally who doesn't want this war to go on any longer than it needs to, right? But that doesn't mean Ukraine caving. That's what I'm saying. It's a marketing game. It's a public relations game, but we're talking politics. We're talking about support in the world, and support in the world is diplomacy and politics. So, any case, that's what's going on with that. Now, the Russians, interestingly, just made a similar comment today saying that they're not interested in negotiating with the Ukrainians because they don't think the Ukrainians are serious. If anything, that was a gift to the Ukrainians for the reason I just said, because now you've got now the Ukrainians can say, well, the Russian spokesman just said today he doesn't want to talk. He's refusing to negotiate with us. So keep an eye on this because I think this whole issue of who's willing to negotiate will probably be an ongoing thing. I've got one more story, and then we'll go to questions. This was interesting. This wasn't Ukraine directly, but Yevgeny Prigozhin. Yevgeny Prigozhin is the guy who is running the Wagner mercenaries, okay? Or Wagner, however you want to call them. And these are the murderous mercenaries that Russia uses around the world. The Malian government has hired them. And they're also being used in the Ukraine war a lot by the Russian government. Prigozhin is also the guy who set up the Internet Research Agency, which is the Russian body that the Russian internet troll farms, right? The body the Russians used to interfere in the 2016 election and have been doing ever since. Well, Prigozhin came out within the last couple of days and admitted that he did, in fact, interfere in the American elections, that he is currently interfering in this election taking place right now, and that they're going to interfere in future elections. At the same time, Bloomberg reported that an organization affiliated with the Internet Research Agency has been focusing specifically on 3 American states, and I'm forgetting which ones, but they're swing states. When we say swing states, we mean states that could swing Democrat or Republican. Thank you, Al. So they could swing either way. In other words, they're kind of right in the middle. And the Russians have been focusing on these 3 states because they're trying to get Republicans elected in order to help Republicans take the House of Representatives, because the thinking is, not the thinking, we know this. I mean, if the Republicans win the House of Representatives, it will be more difficult for Ukraine to get aid passed because there is a lot of complaints amongst certainly the fringe, but the fringe have got power. The MAGA fringe has got power in the Republican Party. And Trump has been not helpful about Ukraine, and the MAGA fringe hasn't either. So the Russians have been trying to, anyway, just wanted to throw in. So actually, it is a Ukraine-related story. Okay, that's it, guys. Let's do the question and answer. So just to remind folks, I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. Whew, a lot today. My daily show, Monday to Friday, for about an hour or so, 6 p.m. Eastern, where we talk about the latest news from Ukraine. Now we're at the point of the show where we do the questions from you all. On TikTok, you can submit them via the Q&A, exactly what Cindy just said. Also, if you are a subscriber on TikTok to the SNN, you can submit your question just on the screen, and I will push the subscriber button right there. I just did, and I can see only the comments from subscribers, so I can see your guys' questions first. And let me look right here, because I thought maybe you guys had something here as well. I think you did on YouTube. PB&J, when the disgruntled Russian POWs return home, do you think they will influence some change in their country? You know, the problem is Russians don't rise up a lot. Sometimes they rise up, but they don't rise up a lot. So I don't know that it's necessarily, if anything, I thought your question was going to be what's going to happen to those guys when they go home because they did a propaganda video. That would be my concern for them. But what I think is interesting is their relatives seeing this video, and the relatives the Russian troops at the front lines have got their phones. So they're talking to the families back home, and they're telling the families how bad it is, that they've been abandoned, they don't have food, that they're getting bombed, all this stuff. What is good, at least, is that it is building discontent at home back in Russia, and that's not a bad thing. That at least helps. But will there ever be a revolution? This is Russia. The status of the bridge that Ukraine or someone had blown up. The status of the bridge that Ukraine or someone had blown up. I'm not sure what you mean, Magical. Say that. You got to write that again. Which, you mean the Kerch Bridge in the south? I'm not sure which one you mean. Do you think Prigozhin wants to take over Putin's job? Well, that's interesting. He's been one of the ones talked about, I believe, as a. I want to say it's Prigozhin, unless I'm mixing him up with somebody else. That he was one of the ones, but the thing is, he's a super hardliner. Now Prigozhin doesn't want to be thrown out a balcony, so I don't think he's going to be. He's not going to be criticizing Putin anytime soon. But see, and this is actually, I will say this too. This is one of the concerns folks have when we talk about, why doesn't somebody just take out Putin or whatever? Because you've got to be careful. There's a number of reasons why, but partially because you got to be careful what comes next. You've got to know what comes next. You don't take out foreign leaders unless you know what leader's coming next. And in the case of Russia, is it going to be somebody just as bad or worse than Putin? It might be. Not to mention, if we try to take out the Russian president, then we're at war with Russia, and it could lead to nukes and lots of bad things. That's the other not insignificant reason why one should worry about such things. Yeah, Copius is saying that interference with elections sounds interesting, but I'm not fully convinced if to believe him because, Russian big guy. No, that's true. He could be bragging. Having said that, Bloomberg already reported from U.S. officials saying that the Russians were interfering again, and it's the Bloomberg story that the Russians were going after the 3 states. We also know that the Russians, we knew that we've got ample evidence of the Russians getting involved in 2016. I see no reason why the Russians would stop. Why would they stop? Why would they stop? If you're actually Magical, I'm going to guess, Magical Photo, I'm going to guess that what you're talking about is the Kerch Bridge. So the Kerch Bridge, there is actually an update on that. So this is the bridge that, hey, Daniel, I've got that. I will, I've got Daniel and Daniel. Okay, I've got both of your questions marked. Drew, I didn't see a bunch of you guys popped in. Let me answer these first, and then I'll get to your guys' questions. So the Kerch Bridge, bridge connecting Russia, which is over here, you can't see it, to Kerch, Ukraine, right here. This is Crimea, stolen by the Russians way back in 2014. Okay, somebody, we assume the Ukrainians, blew up the bridge about a month or so ago, maybe 6 weeks ago. The latest is the rail has not, I don't think the rail's been working at all. The 2 lanes of the 4 lanes have been working, but not great. So the Russians have only been able to send a small amount of cars over at a time. They don't send trucks at all. The trucks have to go via ferry, which shows just how not strong the bridge is. Okay. Well, what the Russians are now saying is, they just announced more of it today, that I've got the super chats. Thank you. I'm going to get to them in a second. What the Russians announced today is that they claim in early December, like I think one of the roadways will be open, and by the end of December, a second one. I don't think they've announced, first of all, I don't believe them, but I also don't think they've announced what's going to be happening with the railway either yet, whether that's going to be fixed. So let's see. I mean, a lot of this depends on Russian engineering, and who the hell knows if the Russians are telling the truth and if the Russians can even fix it, right? All right, lots of little questions here. Daniel Legacy. With the cacophony that may result, good word, with the cacophony that may result in American elections tomorrow, is Ukraine fatigue this winter a real fear? If the Republicans take Congress, and given France, Germany, EU wavering, and inflation, you know, the thing is, people had talked about Ukraine fatigue kicking in, and I don't think there's been any evidence. Okay, I don't think there's been evidence of Ukraine fatigue. The danger is misinformation fatigue. And look, and I've explained this before, Donald Trump doesn't like Ukraine. Donald Trump likes Putin. He likes Russia. We don't know why he likes Russia. We do know Trump thinks that Ukraine was part of a plot with Hillary Clinton to steal the election in 2016. Who knows why he thinks this? We know that Trump got impeached because he tried to extort Ukraine into falsifying evidence against Joe Biden, right? And he tried to force Ukraine to get involved in the 2020 election, and he got impeached. Knowing Trump doesn't like when he's embarrassed. He seeks revenge. So that is, that's a problem for Ukraine going forward. What you are seeing is Republican polls are getting worse on Ukraine as time goes on. That's because Republican voters are being told to think more badly on Ukraine as time goes on. Thank you, Snoozman. They're being told that our money's being wasted. They're being told the money could be spent better at home, even though the amount of money going to Ukraine is literally nothing in comparison. I mean, $16 billion with a B. Yeah, it's a lot of money for you and me, but for the U.S. government, it's nothing in the overall budget. Absolutely nothing. It wouldn't make and the other thing, thank you, Torbo. The other issue is that it's not like we, didn't fund Medicare because, we were going to pay Medicare this month, but now we're not because we're giving money to Ukraine. The Republicans can't point to a single program, because there isn't one, that we didn't fund because we're funding Ukraine. Okay, that isn't the case. But the voters are being told this, and that's where the fatigue is coming in. There's this notion of, and let's face it, also in American politics, probably world politics, in American politics, voters don't like foreign aid. The idea of helping countries abroad, they don't like. And they always think foreign aid, when asked about what percentage of the budget is foreign aid, voters will always say 25%. And I forget the exact amount, if it's 1% or less than 1%. Hold on. Hey, Google, what percent of the U.S. budget is foreign aid?
According to Wikipedia, in actuality, less than 1% of the U.S. federal budget goes towards foreign aid.
See, I knew it, as Wikipedia backs me up. Less than 1% of the U.S. budget goes to foreign aid, but the American public usually thinks like 25% does. So it's an argument that works with people because they don't know the truth. In any case, so that does worry me. Let's see what happens. I mean, the only thing is, I don't know. I don't even know what to say on this, because it's upsetting to me. I do think Biden has to do a better job explaining to the American people why this matters, and why taking Russia on matters, and why there's a greater danger to Russia, to the Americans as a country, if we don't take Russia on now. Thank you, Dai, for the never ceasing gifts, and I love that one with the stratosphere there. Daniel O'Neill, Danielle. It's summer. Oh God, Daniel's giving me a future question. I feel like Daniel's giving me a college question here. Look out. It's summer 2023. Ukraine has ejected the Russians to the 1991 borders, meaning they get Crimea back. Thank you for the hat there, Ellen, for the flowers. Russia persists in attacking Ukrainian cities with missiles. Ukraine invades Russia proper and sacks Belgorod. Could this happen? Why not? I don't think it happens because Ukraine will need our support to stop Russia from attacking again. Let's say that next summer, Ukraine gets all of its land back, including Crimea, okay? And that'd be great. That'd be fantastic. But what happens here? If at some point the war ends, Russia is going to build up its forces and they're going to attack again. It could be 5 years from now. It could be 10 years from now. And, we are going to be in a position, Ukraine's going to be in a position where they're going to need continued aid from the West. They're going to need our weapons, right? They're going to need training, everything else to protect them in the future from Russia. And they're not going to get that probably if they were to invade Russia and, for example, destroy the town of Belgorod, or even go in and maybe they seize the town of Belgorod. Then you're going to see NATO and Western countries probably uncomfortable with helping Ukraine. So that's why I don't see that happening. I think in the end, also, here's the other thing. Why would they do it? I guess I would ask you. I think the Ukrainians have been very smart about being strategic in the way they fight here, okay? And they, for example, sacking the town of Belgorod, so what? So what? What do they get out of it? They don't get anything out of it. Now, going and blowing up Russian missile sites across the border in Russia, that helps because the Russians are using those sites to launch missiles and blow up Ukrainian water facilities, Ukrainian electricity facilities, blowing up Ukrainian houses, civilians, right, in their homes and their apartments. That strategically makes sense to me that the Ukrainians would hit Russian military equipment in Russia, like artillery, but just simply knocking out a town to be a jerk. Who does that sound like? Sounds like Russia. Doesn't sound like Ukraine. I don't think they would do it. Just my take. Drew Reskin. Hey, Drew. Once Ukraine wins, do you see a longer lasting peace worldwide or more conflicts like this? I mean, Jesus, Drew, who knows? I mean, again, my bigger concern right away is just what happens with Russia and Ukraine. And that's why I think this is one of those situations where we've got to think, we've got to keep supporting Ukraine. And I would go beyond Biden. I don't think this is about creating a tie. Biden never admits it, but I think Biden wants a tie. I think he doesn't really want Ukraine or Russia to win so that there can be some negotiated peace. I don't think you can have a negotiated peace that ever works here. I think you would have to have, Ukraine winning, Russia imploding, but I mean, maybe not imploding into civil war, but Russia imploding where the government gets overthrown and the people rise up and the Russians finally decide, oh my God, we want to be a democracy. We want to be a European country. We want to join the European Union, right? I mean, that all that stuff happens and the Russians finally make peace with their neighbors. I don't see that happening. I mean, we kind of had that crazy feeling that this might happen back in 1991 when the Soviet Union dissolved and we had 10 years of not very good, or maybe 9 years. And then Putin came on and that was the end of that. So I just, that's my big fear, is what happens with Russia and Ukraine. And I guess the other fear is if we don't help Ukraine win, if Russia somehow comes out with a win here, Russia is simply going to build up its military and go after other people as well. And I still worry about Russia. Look at the way they're going after our elections. What about trying to foment trouble with the Baltic states? Trying to foment more trouble with Poland. Helping freedom fighters in those countries, promote civil wars. I mean, fake civil wars like the fake civil war in Ukraine. Anyway, that's my concern. I mean, around the world, I don't know. Lasting peace worldwide, who the hell knows? But I do. Hard is saying USSR number 2. That's kind of, or 2.0. That's kind of how I feel. I feel like this is the Cold War again. And unfortunately, we're dealing with a really bad. The Russians are bad. I mean, the Russian government, it's become kind of like the Soviets. It's not good. It's not good. Ben Stoll is asking, what do you think about the Kyiv evacuation? What he's talking about is there had been discussion allegedly, by Ukrainian officials that if this winter the Russians so destroy the water and the heat and the electricity to Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, the government is urging people to basically leave and go stay with relatives in the rest of the country, where maybe they do have heat and they do have water, because they're worried that you're going to have a big capital full of, a couple million people with no heat and no water. They got to do what they got to do. I mean, I kind of feel like at this point we need a better response to what the Russians are doing by knocking all this stuff out, and that means possibly what the Ukrainians are saying, which is taking out the Russian equipment, taking out the Russian the Russian surface to air or surface to surface missiles in Russia itself, so they can't attack the Russians. Sorry, Annie. Thank you. I was thinking of Annie as I'm talking this. So the Russians can't effectively keep attacking the Ukrainians this way. And you know what? The the Iranian equipment has got to be intercepted as well. And who knows what's going on with that? Who knows? Oh, thanks, Drew. Happy to help if I can. What else we got here? Let me see. Subscribers. I am John Aravosis. Just to remind folks, this is the Aravosis Report. Thank you for the cake there, Annette. This is my daily show, Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, in which we talk about the latest news from Ukraine. And then I do about a half hour of questions and answers. Your questions, my answers, and we're in the Q&A section right now. Please do follow me on TikTok and elsewhere, and please keep the gifts coming because I am independent media. The only support I get is from you guys. So, I like your support like that too. But the gifts also. Thank you, James. James is being the whale king tonight. The wave. Thank you for the whale on TikTok, James. That was incredibly. You are being very sweet tonight. I appreciate that. Oh man. All right. More questions. Actually, somebody had a SNN question, a subscriber. Is it true Ukraine will be given long-range missiles? Not that we've heard, Hunter. Not that we've heard. The way that it's worked so far is the Americans and others have given Ukraine weapons that can shoot missiles or rockets that can shoot maybe 60 miles, maybe about 100 kilometers. The thing is, we've got missiles and rockets. Actually, what I'm talking now is about the HIMARS or the MLRS system, which I don't know if it's the Brits or whoever had given that to, but basically the HIMARS, which you've heard a lot about, this rocket system that we gave the Ukrainians that's super precise, that they've been really causing havoc with the Russians. Thank you, dear Benji. The rockets we gave them can only go 60 miles. The Ukrainians have been wanting the better rockets that can go 200 miles or 300 kilometers. We refuse to give them because we keep saying, well, if we give it, it'll be an affront to Russia and Putin will get mad. And who knows what he'll do if he gets mad? Well, in any case, it ain't happening yet. So I wish it would. Thank you, Addie, for the hat. I wish it would, but it's not. So, what else we got here? It's funny. Whenever I take a weekend off, I can feel my throat being tighter. It's like I get out of practice. Thank you, Dawn. I've not seen that one before. That was very cool. Let me look. Do you think our support of Ukraine gives China pause about Taiwan? I do, Annie. I do. I think, my suspicion is China is watching what's happening with Taiwan. They watched the world rally together and support Ukraine. They watched NATO and a lot of Asian countries get together and support Ukraine in terms of, really support Ukraine, whether militarily, whether with financial, whether with boycotts, and not boycotts, but trade embargoes, things like that, or the banking boycott, things like that. The sanctions is what I mean. I'm sorry, not boycotts, sanctions. I think that China, it's funny. There's been some concern about China, upping its schedule to plan to invade Taiwan or whatever. But there's also, I think, a fair argument to be made that China has seen what's been happening in the world and is seeing that, thank you, Alex, there isn't a large appetite for countries invading their neighbors. And China doesn't see Taiwan as a neighbor, but the world does. And I think it should give them pause, and I think it does give them pause. That'd be my guess. But again, who knows inside China whether they actually do see it that way, right? I mean, it's possible. What else? Sorry, Syndicate's giving it a little election update. I'll put it up there for you guys to see. Yeah, Twitter. Twitter's been fun. Well, that's its own question. We could talk about another time. Oh my God, Elon Musk and Twitter. That's been quite the situation there. What else we got here? Is North Korea trying to imitate Russia? North Korea, the thing is I would say about North Korea, you are literally dealing with crazy. I mean, Russia's not crazy. Putin's not crazy. I always say this. He's crazy, but he's not crazy, right? North Korea, woo, crazy. I don't know what motivates that guy, but he's dangerous. He's got nuclear weapons and he's dangerous. And I think you're also dealing with, thank you, Annie, for the mariachi hat. You're also dealing with a situation where in North Korea, they don't want to be ignored. And when I say ignored, what I mean, Putin's war is getting all the attention. Putin's bombing. Look at our bombing. So it's really scary. It's really scary. I do believe. What else we got here? I did see that. Thank you, Daniel. Okay, this is interesting. I did not see this, Franny. Franny is saying, how do you feel about the U.S. sending their biggest nuclear sub to the Black Sea where the U.K. and Russia are fighting? The U.K. and Russia are fighting. The U.K. and Russia aren't fighting in the Black Sea. What are you talking about? I did not see anything about the U.S. sending their biggest nuclear sub. I did see that the two Russian ships that have been there for 9 months finally gave up and left because the Turks wouldn't let them pass. But I didn't see anything about the U.S. sending a nuclear sub to the Black Sea. But also the UK and Russia aren't fighting. I'm not sure what you meant by that. Ukraine. Oh, Ukraine. Sorry. That always drives me nuts when people put UK. Yeah. Let me see if the U.S. is sending a nuclear sub. That would be very interesting. Let me see. Well, the U.S. would be allowed because we're not a party to the fight. What Turkey did is Turkey instituted the Montreux Treaty, either convention or whatever it is, 1936 or whatever, that basically it's got control over the Bosporus. So it's got control over that little, whatever you call it, that it passes through there, isthmus or whatever it is. And it, in times of war, it can stop the transport of belligerents going through there. So it unless the belligerents were based there. So in other words, the Russians can send ships into the Black Sea if the ships were originally based in the Black Sea and they're simply coming home. Now, okay, so other people are saying the U.S. nuclear sub is going into the Mediterranean. Which makes more sense. Let me see here. U.S. the world's largest nuclear submarine. The world's largest? Isn't the Russians the largest? The new one? Okay, maybe not. The Rhode Island has entered the Mediterranean Sea. U.S. dubbed as a rider of the apocalypse, arrived in the port of Gibraltar on Spain's south coast on November 1st. 24 ICBMs. Is likely heading to a strategic position in the Black Sea after Russian authorities announced Russian nuclear submarine Generalissimus Suvorov had successfully fired a ballistic missile. Okay. That's interesting, actually. Well, I would want to find an article somewhere I trust because I'm not seeing an article somewhere I trust. I mean, this is like in something called Asian markets, which I don't necessarily think, you know what I mean? Like, what the heck's Asian markets? USS Rhode Island. Let me look here again. I just like it to be. Well, no, Navy.mil. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. arrives in Gibraltar 5 days ago. Interesting. Let me just see here. Home ported. It sounds like we sent it there to send a message, is what it sounds like. It sounds like we sent it to send a message. That's interesting. I like it. I like it. Now, my suspicion is, okay, Syndicate's weighing in too. My suspicion is because Russia has been making so much noise about nuclear weapons and nuclear war and everything else, the U.S. is basically not so subtly reminding them that we have nukes too. And, the problem all along, which I've been saying, is Russia knows we've got nukes. It makes no sense for Russia to be constantly talking about nuclear war. It's just stupid. But, if it helps to move a nuclear submarine nearby just to say, hello, the Russians aren't going to like it that our sub is there. And Bosporus Strait, there you go. They're not going to like that our sub is there. So I have no problem with it. But let me see here. Yep. Key nuclear submarines reportedly headed to the Black Sea. Strategic retort to Russia, Rhode Island on November 5th, 4 days after arriving port of Gibraltar. It is now en route to a strategic position after Russia's announcement about its newest nuclear-powered submarine. Good. I don't know that it matters. I mean, because again, Russia knows. I mean, they know we've got the that we've got the nukes, and I mean the submarines ICBMs can go. What was the distance? I mean, they can go like halfway around the world practically. What's the distance here? Is it in the? Let me just see here. I'm not seeing it in the story here, but I'll bet you. USS Rhode Island. Oh, hold on. Let me just look here. USS Rhode Island. It's got to say. I'm looking at Wikipedia to see what it says about its weapons. I mean, we know the weapons, but what the range is of the weapons. It's got to be pretty darn far. Okay, I don't have this handy. You guys are military experts out there. Okay, 3,000 miles? Yeah. So 3,000 nautical miles. He's saying 3,000 nautical miles or 5,500 kilometers. So that's pretty freaking good. Yeah. I was going to say even more than that. It can go pretty far. So it doesn't need to get terribly close to Russia to be able to do that. I've never heard of an SSBN operating in the Mediterranean either. SSNs? Oh, that's interesting. Huh. 7,500 miles? Interesting. Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, the Russians aren't going to like it being closer. Anyway, clearly. But anyway. All right. I'm going to do a quick summary, which I always do when the show is over. I do a quick summary of the news that we talked about today and then call it quits for the night because I'm exhausted. Oh, this time change thing. Oh, I got to sleep late. I woke up early. It's like, just too tired. All right. Let's do a quick summary of the news. So, everybody. Satellite images show over 1,500 new graves near the occupied Ukrainian town of Mariupol. The Russians are upping their efforts to force Ukrainians to evacuate Kherson province. Explosions were reported at an oil terminal in Russia's Belgorod region. Hopefully the Ukrainians were responsible for that. The Wall Street Journal says Biden's top national security advisor has been engaged in recent months in confidential conversations with top aides to Vladimir Putin. The Economist says that arrangements have already been made for Iran to supply Russia with missiles. Bonnie, thank you. We've got another wave. Bonnie for the whale. Thank you, Bonnie. That was very sweet of you. Thank you. I really do appreciate you guys with the gifts. It helps a lot. And actually, it's been helping a lot because finally, anyway, it's a long story, but I'm like pouring everything I can into this, but it's a funny way to try to make money doing Ukraine updates. But you guys have been helping me, so thank you so much. I was saying the Economist says arrangements are already made for Iran to supply Russia with missiles. Russia confirms another senior general, General Alexander Lapin, is out. The Washington Post on Saturday reported that U.S. officials have privately encouraged the Ukrainian government to signal an openness to talk with Russia. What else do we have here? So I'm reading the comments as I'm going here. Ukraine says it's ready to negotiate with the next Russian president. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said today that Russia is open to negotiations with Ukraine, but that the moment is not right for talks. Now, actually, I just have to say as an aside, what a Russian thing to say. Oh, we are very open to negotiations with Ukraine, but right now isn't the time for talks. Well, that means you're not open to negotiations if right now isn't the time for talks. And finally, Yevgeny Prigozhin admits to interfering in the U.S. midterm elections. All right, guys, thank you so much. Thank you for the little gloves. Thank you, Bonnie. And I'm already forgetting. Was it? I'm forgetting. It only shows me the last 10 gifts. I hate that. Oh, here we go. Can I see more here? Hang on. It's not showing. Oh, shoot. I wanted to see the last. I'm forgetting who did the first two whales. I remember, I want to say Boudreaux, the name. I'm totally spacing out now. James, I think it was. Thank you for those as well. All right, guys, I'm going to call it quits. I'm going to skip the Discord tonight because I'm just exhausted. And tomorrow's election day. I haven't decided how I'm handling election day yet, whether I'm going to try to do a Ukraine update, whether I'm going to do an election update. Part of the problem is at 6 p.m. at night, there probably isn't going to be a lot of election news. Thank you, Loyalty. There's probably not going to be a lot of election news yet at that point. So I'm not sure. I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow. I'm going to be doing updates on TikTok of videos that I will be doing. Let's see tomorrow night. Maybe I'll just, I don't know. Maybe we'll do a hangout tomorrow night as the evening goes on a little bit. I'm thinking I've just got to decide. I will tell you right now, part of the problem with American elections is we've got, God, what do we have? 5 time zones, I think. 5 time zones, including Hawaii. And the elections are ending at different times in each one. So some of them elections, sometimes the polls close at 6 or 7. Sometimes the polls close at 8. Different time zones at the same time. Thank you, dear Benji. So that you've got a situation where either we know early in the evening how things are going, or we don't know until, 10, 11 o'clock at night, Thank you for the garland there, Ellen. So let's play it by ear for tomorrow. If I go live, I go live. But I'm kind of thinking it might be later in the evening because, for example, there's no way I could sit here for an hour at 6 o'clock and talk Ukraine when the election's going on behind me. It's going to be driving me crazy. So I think tomorrow is going to be election day. And I will probably check in as the evening's going on. Let's do that. Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. I appreciate this. And as I said, I'll be checking in the Discord in writing tonight, but the nose is feeling much better. Thank you. But I can tell, like I said, my throat and stuff is just kind of tight. I'd rather not do more talking tonight in the Discord. So, all right, guys, let's talk later. See you guys tomorrow. Thank you for joining me as always. All right. Bye-bye. And you all,